I wrote it last Tuesday, which was my only stream right before Thanksgiving. And we're going to take our first edit of it now and see what we can do with it, see if there's any changes that need to be made. I don't anticipate making sweeping changes to the story, but we'll see what happens as we go through. So this is Who Gets What by Jay Wilburn. It really did sound like the door to the conference room locked. Blake Chazelle hated confined spaces or the feeling of being trapped, so you could imagine how this divorce arbitration was playing with his nerves even before the judge stormed out. Two walls on this spacious third floor corner room made it hard to feel too trapped, even if the judge had made good on his odd threat. Only 5 people sat on two sides of the table, made for 20. 3 sides if you counted the court reporter, the guy tapping the record into his little machine every time someone spoke. There was a word for that job because there was a word for every job. Got a dropped word there. Blake had the word scriptographer stuck in his head, but he knew that wasn't it. All right. Blake was regional coordinator for Dynmar Medical Services. That was his job that paid for their lives. Tammy Rogers, still technically Tammy Rogers Giselle for now, made pottery, jewelry, and his life miserable. None of those jobs paid shit, which was why she needed to come away from this with a chunk of his hard earned life. All right, I think that needs to be hyphenated. Yes, indeed. He had several titles he used regularly for Tammy, but none he wanted the recorder guy to tap into the record. At least they had no children. That had been said to him by more than one person who thought they were helping. Okay. I think that's an important detail that I left out earlier. Next to Tammy, Don Hintz, her old, fat, frumpy lawyer. I think I left the word lawyer out. That's kind of significant. Looked to the court recorder like most of them did after the door clicked shut. Don was the only one sweating under this chilly air conditioning. He was lopsided in his chair all the time, now leaning toward the recorder with his eyes wide. Before he sat down, the cuffs of his, let's say before he had sat down, when this nightmare meeting first started, the cuffs of his pants billowed around his fat calves, making him look like the kind of lawyer that regularly landed his clients in jail. Blake should be. Blake should have been. I got a tense problem here. Should have been so lucky with Tammy today. All right. Don stammered a bit, but finally got his words out. Did he really lock the door? Instead of answering, the recorder guy recorded. All right, let me get the tense right on that. Tap, tap, tappity, tap, tap. Then he paused, staring back at them. Tammy looked to the recorder for answers too. This guy was their closest connection to the absent judge. Tammy still glanced at Blake's lawyer as she had been doing the whole morning. Although this had dragged on into the afternoon already, Blake thought. He was paying the hourly on this arbitration for his half and her half once she took it out from his pocket. Blake, I think that sentence is a little confusing. All right. Maybe it's significant that he's paying for the arbitration. I don't think it is, though, in terms of story, so I'm going to cut that detail out just to keep that paragraph clean. Blake liked that Tammy couldn't stop looking. He had to remind himself not to stare sometimes, too. His bulldog of a divorce lawyer wore a form-fitting orange dress. She was blonde and looked young, whether she really was or not. She wasn't the had work done, sort of young looking. Laney Strokeline was defying gravity, and time was the. All right, I need to fix this. I'm going to have to do hyphens here. Okay, give me just a moment. All right. She wasn't the had work done, sort of young looking. Laney Strokeland was the defying gravity and time, sort of beautiful. The kind of stunning that angered other women. This was the sort of woman that Tammy probably pictured Blake with when he went off to earn money, and Tammy sat around the house. He paid for making, let's say, her pottery. This is a long sentence, but I think it may still work. Making her pottery in the rare moments she wasn't on YouTube, Netflix, TikTok, or whatever the hell else. Sweaty, frumpy Don posed his query differently. Read back to me the judge's last statement. That needs to be possessive. Before he left, the recorder responded, Judge Rippand, you four can sort this out on your own. That probably needs to be a colon. Hold on. The recorder responded, Judge Rippand, you four can sort this out on your own before I waste another moment going in circles. I'll be outside. I'm locking you in. The guy poised his fingers above his keys and waited as if that were the end of it. Then he stepped out. Did he really lock us in? Don's voice got shrill at the end. Blake hoped his lawyer, his divorce warrior, would eat this frumpy little man alive. Tap, tappity tap. Don's shrill little voice was now on the record. I wanted on the record that Judge Rippin left the room. Tap, tap, tap. So noted. Laney reached a hand with perfect natural nails across the table, just short of Don's notebooks, with pages sticking out. His laptop sat open at a crooked angle. It stood out in comparison to Laney's side, where everything lined up square. Tammy stared at that hand and its shiny nails. Blake noticed her noticing. Laney said, Don, I think we can solve this over the next little while unless you are not able to continue. He looked up, but not at her. Where Tammy couldn't look away for long, Don could never really gaze upon her. He always averted his eyes to one side above her head, or most often down at the shiny table. With her hand right where he would normally stare, Don found something to focus on outside the windows. I'm fine to continue. I'm fine. We're fine. Let's go. You can buy a new one. Tammy blurted out. Her eyes darted between Blake and Laney. He hoped she pictured him with her, and it was killing her. Her outburst, let's say, came from nowhere. But he still knew exactly what she was talking about. It took Blake a beat. No, there we go. I messed that up because I thought I was being cute. So I'm going to cut that whole sentence. It took Blake a beat to remember what they had been arguing over before the judge stormed out and sealed them in together. In that pause, Don hovered a pudgy hand over his client's arm, but didn't quite bring himself to actually touch her. He tried to whisper something quietly by her ear. Blake couldn't make it out, but the recorder, I need to put ER here, but the recorder tapped something into the record. Don pulled away from Tammy as if being caught in some act more nefarious than trying to get his client to shut her trap. Blake said, I shouldn't have to buy a new one. I bought that one. You enjoyed it plenty when we were together. I'm not stepping down so you can step up in the world. You don't get somewhere between half and all, dear. Let's keep it friendly, John said. Laney cut in. If you want friendly, go into elder law, Don. She can live comfortably on that package we offered, and if she insists on pushing this, Dawn, then the things get sold and we argue over her share of the sale. But then we are going to renegotiate the package to reflect the funds from selling everything off. Up to you. I worked for. Tammy lost her train of thought when she drew Laney's attention. What? Blake snapped. Did you get confused about what that word meant? You don't work. You've never worked. You took and I gave. So now you are trying to take again because that's all you know how to do. Don burst out, That's enough. I've had enough of that kind of talk. The judge had enough of it too. Blake was surprised by the force behind that. Don was still lopsided in his chair, but there was real fire behind those words. Laney said, Don, you need a minute? Maybe we should call a recess. He waved toward the doors until we figure out what. If it's really locked, Laney said, you can get a cup of water or more coffee while the adults talk here. That's not how this works, Laney. She shrugged as he stared at the table. We can't officially call a recess without the judge here. It's arbitration, Don said. We can, as Don searched for his words and the recorder. Oh, I keep messing that up. The recorder tapped away. Blake leaned over the table and said, What do you think you're trying to do here? Get my fair share, Tammy answered back, a little quick for Blake's liking. The tippity tapping continued. Blake wasn't sure if all the crosstalk was getting recorded, but he didn't much care in that moment. You have no share. He managed to stop short of getting a slur into the record. We're about to see, aren't we? I see fine. I've seen how you have taken and taken while staying cold and resentful for all I ever gave you in this one-sided relationship. She snorted at him. Blake wondered how that sort of thing got recorded in the transcript. Blake, I don't think you realize where the cold was coming from in that house. Is it warmer where you're squatting now as you wait for this to work out, dear? She rolled her eyes like the teenager she was. No. Let's say like a teenager. We'll just cut it there. I had a whole nother thing about him thinking of her being immature and selfish, but I think we've gotten that without having to spell it out. His opinion, anyway. I don't know what it was like to live with poor Blake, so maybe he is the problem. She rolled her eyes like a teenager. He wanted to slap her, but he'd never admit that even to himself. Okay? I'd rather live in a cardboard box than another moment next to you. He meant to smile, but it felt more like a snarl. That's a starting point in this negotiation that I can live with, Tammy. You'll find out what you can live with once this is over. Maybe we can get this back on track. Laney broke from her procedural discussions with Don that Blake had tuned out. Blake still snarled, I can't wait until you are some other man's problem. Once enough people grow tired of your shit, maybe you'll have to admit that you are the problem here. Don shouted out, The judge locked us in the room, Laney. We can't ignore that. We can't. Tappity tap tap. Whatever makes you feel like a man, Tammy said with a shit-eating grin, and she looked out the windows to her side beyond where Judge Rippin, still getting paid by the hour, used to sit. She stared out that window like she had won. Maybe she had, because Blake was furious even before she added, Good discussion, champ. Alright. F you, Tammy. That's enough, Don cut in. Why don't you get pants that fit and leave us alone, Blake said. Laney laughed, down on a lower level of his mind, below all his rage, hurt, and shame. Blake knew his lawyer should be telling him to shut up, but he enjoyed that laugh. That laugh made him feel like a man. All right. You should be keeping your client under control, Don said. Blake didn't care that what Frumpy Don said was actually true. He wanted to slap that man on his thick jowls and watch them shake. That truth he could admit to himself. The lawyers were back to their squabbling as Laney said, You don't concern yourself with what I tell my client, counselor. Tammy said, I've been effing myself for years because I'm the only one who can do it right. You know that's not true, Blake said with his own smirk. You wish it was, but we both know it's not. I've gotten good at faking with you in every part of our life. You're good at being fake, I'll give you that. I can't wait until I find someone worth my time, Blake. I'll spend your money on my life with him, and we'll laugh about it as he gives me what you couldn't, all on your dime. Sadly, Blake said, trying to keep the shake out of his voice, he'll probably end up hitting you like all the others before me. But we both know that sometimes you like that sort of thing. Sometimes you beg for and thank me afterward. All right, that's kind of dark, and I'm not implying that any of these things are true between them, but just that this is the stuff they're saying to each other. F you, Blake. F you to hell. That felt good. He was tied in knots and thought he might need to throw up later. But in this hell of pain and loss, that little jab that got through to her ego felt good in comparison. Ice water in hell, he thought. I'm going to have a problem finding someone better to do that for me. I'm going to have no problem finding someone better to do that for me, Tammy. He tilted his head ever so slightly in Laney's direction, hoping Tammy noticed, but that his lawyer was too wrapped up in flogging Don to see it. Unlike you, I have plenty to offer. I hope this BS drags out forever until there is nothing left to give you. I'll build it all back up from scratch on my own like I did before, while you scratch out a life you deserve in the gutter, you be. All right, he finally said, and was sure he finally said it, and was sure the recorder tapped it out. Once that got read back, he knew he'd be giving her half for sure. Still, in this battle of emotional nutrition, it felt like another small win. I'll scratch your eyes out, Blake. His mouth unhinged just a little. I don't know if your mouth can unhinge just a little, but we're going to, let's say, dropped open. I don't think your mouth can unhinge. His mouth dropped open just a little. He turned to see if anyone noticed. That was when she lifted off her chair, knocking it over backward with a crash, and clawed the side of his face across the table with nails chewed ragged and pitiful in comparison to Laney's manicure. All the conversation ceased at once. To his credit, the recorder, I keep spelling that wrong because I keep putting an ED instead of an ER. To his credit, the recorder tapped out the last little bits of what was said before pausing as well. Blake felt all four burning lines diagonally down his cheek. One was wildly close to his eye, nearly making good on her threat to claw them out. He tasted blood inside his mouth on that side. Did she claw straight through? It hurt like hell, but that didn't seem possible. He was afraid to test the area with his tongue, though. Don whispered, Tammy? Tap, tap. Laney stayed seated as Tammy leaned on the table with both hands admiring her work. Let's say on both hands. No, not one, on. On both hands admiring her work. Her eyes were glassy, like she wasn't really seeing through them. Blake had seen her that way a few times before, and none of them were good. Laney turned. I want it on the record that Tammy Rogers assaulted my client. I think we need to take that break now, whether the judge is here to authorize it or not, Don said. No breaks, Laney shouted. We're filing assault charges and dealing with that before there is any more discussion of this. Tappity, tap, tap, tap. You want to tell them the things you begged for? Tammy spoke in a lower register than her typical voice. Blake reached for the gouges in his cheek, but chickened out before really touching them. He forced a smile that brought searing pain with it. You should go pick out that cardboard box now, B. You're finally going to get what you really deserve. Tammy snatched up her lawyer's laptop. As she raised it over her head, the cord tore the outlet from the side of the table instead of from the computer itself. She swung the device full into the side of Blake's bleeding face. He saw the thing coming from yesterday. She telegraphed the attack so fully, but he sat in shock through it, and his teeth felt loose in his mouth as he rolled into the metal support. As he rolled, let's say, in his chair. Rolled in his chair into the metal support between windows behind him. He managed to stay in his chair and upright as his ear rang and the room spun. Even the recorder guy cursed after that with no more tippity taps from his fleet little fingers. I need that to be tappity taps because we kept saying tap. With no more tappity taps from his fleet little fingers. Don stood, but instead of restraining his client, he turned and ran face first into the conference room doors with a crash. "Stop right now," Laney ordered. Tammy crawled over the table. The cord did pull from the laptop, ripping out its port as she came down on her feet on Blake's side of the table. "What are you doing?" His words came mushy from his swelling mouth. Let's say his already swelling mouth. I know that swelling doesn't really come that quickly, but I'm going to say it anyway. From his already swelling mouth and through the blood he now swallowed down. He just watched his estranged wife approach with her lawyer's, and that needs to be possessive, with her lawyer's computer over her head, like he was curious to see what might happen next. Laney stepped in and grabbed Tammy's elbow. Tammy whirled and clocked Laney under the chin. The lawyer's pretty head twisted away from the blow. That was going to leave a mark that would be difficult to cover with makeup. Tammy turned to Blake again, and that was why she missed the right cross from Laney. And let's say that. That's what I need to say. I was confused on what word I was trying to write because I wrote it wrong. So Tammy turned to Blake again, and that was why she missed the right cross from Laney that staggered Tammy to the side. If she had been wearing heels like Laney instead of flats, she would have fallen for sure, and this whole afternoon might have turned out differently. Watching his beautiful lawyer clock his soon-to-be ex like that was worth every billed hour. It would be the highlight of this terrible spiraling day for him. Tammy charged, and Laney brought her fists up. Tammy swung through the guard, through the, let's say, unpracticed. Okay. And, oh no, okay. The screen, okay, I lost my place, sorry. Tammy charged Laney through, and Laney brought her fists up. Tammy swung through the unpracticed guard and nearly took the lawyer's head with the computer. The screen cracked everywhere, and the display finally winked out. To her credit, Laney held on and took the busted computer with her out of Tammy's grasp and to the floor. Tammy tried to retrieve it, but Laney scooted under the table with it as she, got a lot of missing words here, as she spit out a little blood that clashed with her tight orange dress. Don shouted from the door, "It really is locked," as if that were the most significant fact at the moment. Tammy grabbed Blake's throat with both hands and squeezed. She wasn't the strongest, and Blake could still breathe even though pressure built quickly in his head. "You like this?" she growled into his face. "Sometimes you like this, didn't you?" He managed to spit a syrupy pink swirl into her face. He braced himself for more claws, but got a closed fist this time. All right. Need to add that in. He took a few shallow stabs before he realized she still wore her engagement ring. Blake got into motion and took her by the wrist as he started to stand. She headbutted him twice, and he sat back. As she reared back for another, he released her wrists and slammed his forehead into her nose with let's say his own forehead. As she reared back, he released her wrist and slammed his own forehead into her nose with a satisfying crunch. Tammy sprawled backwards, just catching the edge, let's say, of the table. before she would have fallen to the floor. Blake stood the rest of the way, but let's say the rest of the way up, but had to brace. Okay, there's no comma there. But had to brace a palm against one window to keep his balance. Okay. Tammy's nose was bright red but didn't look broken. The hand with the engagement ring still on it was twisted up from a couple broken fingers that would make it harder to ever get that ring off. She didn't know how to make a fist. Blake's vision was cloudy on one side, and he prayed the diamond on her ring hadn't done that. Maybe she made a fist just fine based on how she had rocked him. All right. All you had to do was give it to me and buy yourself another. Are you effing kidding me right now? The slur of his own words made him more angry, and as he charged forward, he thought about what the terrified recorder guy might type about him. Tammy took up Laney's computer in a rush. Hers was not plugged in. It had a good battery, which was quite heavy when she put it across Blake's skull and sent him toppling to the floor. After his head knocked a chair out of the way right against the cartilage of his ear, he wished he had just met the floor full on. Black keys and black letter keys. Black letter keys and pieces of white teeth scattered out across the thin carpet beyond where Blake landed. All right, good stuff. Laney grabbed Tammy by the ankle from under the table, but Blake still braced himself for the computer with all its heavy battery life to come crashing toward him. Tammy turned and battered Blake's lawyer in the head with her own damaged computer. Laney tried to crawl away, but Tammy followed her under. Blake groaned as he tried to remember how to get off a floor and failed. Don screamed, "Let me out of here. They're fighting. They're killing each other." Blake hated him for that. This was no fight, at least not one he was winning. This was a nightmare. Recorder guy joined frumpy Don beating the doors. Someone called muffled from the other side, "Is there a key for this?" "Let us out," Don screamed in a note that hurt Blake's already throbbing skull. Why did they make doors like this that key locked from the outside in this era? How could an officer get away with that? How could an office get away with that? Okay, that's correct. All right. What about fire codes and HR? Tammy screamed and scrambled out from under the table. 2 manicured nails had embedded in her cheek and tore free of the lawyer's fingers. Oh God, Tammy cried as she fled on her knees. "Someone help me." Blake couldn't believe she would beg for help like that after what she had done already. Laney followed Tammy out into the open and stood on her tall heels. She was still stunningly. She was still stunningly beautiful, even with one eye swelling and blood trickling from one nostril and the corner of her mouth. She really did look like a warrior now, coming up behind Tammy on her knees like some sort of sacrifice. "Get her," Blake growled under his breath as he struggled to his hands and knees. It was Tammy who rose, and as she did, she swung the heavy chair that Blake had backed into the window. The rollers flew loose on impact. The support post bent with a screech. Laney lifted off the ground. One of her heels flew off a lovely foot as she pitched backward far enough to strike her head on the edge of the table on the way down. Whether it was the chair strike, the table's edge, or the awkward landing, Laney Strickland landed with her head twisted almost completely around. The deceased lawyer and the chair both bounced and went still. And then went still. Blake was now proceeding without representation. Tammy actually cracked her knuckles as she turned her attention on her husband. Blake remembered how to move and scrambled under the table. He scattered the chairs on both sides as on his way through. Don and the recorder went from staring in shock back to beating on the door and begging for release. As Blake emerged from under the table near the coffee and water, Tammy ran over the top and dropped both knees onto his lower back from the air. All his breath left him as he was sure organs had ruptured. Okay. The recorder. Okay, need to fix that. The recorder picked up a chair and started striking the door with it. The wood splintered as it bounced back. The wood splintered, and as it bounced back, it clipped Don Hintz. The lawyer, with his ill-fitting pants, held his face and stumbled away from the door crying. Tammy knelt on Blake's back as she fiddled with something on the high table next to them. He heaved sideways, pitching her off, and scattered sugar packets and creamers as she fell. Blake stood up, but only just ducked aside in time to avoid taking a half-full coffee decanter to the face. It shattered against the wall. Hot coffee still splashed him, and at least one shard of glass stuck through his coat and shirt into his shoulder. She came at him with the jagged pieces still attached to the handle. Blake squealed and only managed to divert her mad charge enough to get around. Poor Don Hintz never saw her coming as she tore away the side of his neck and shredded the artery underneath. Even if medical personnel were present, let's say at the time, there probably would have been no saving him. He lasted another few seconds, spraying blood all over his client, the floor, the table, the wall, and even the recorder, who gagged as he tried to spit the stuff out of his mouth. Don disfigured his face as he split the tabletop on his way down. Say the thick tabletop. As he split the thick tabletop on his way down. With the lawyers both out of the way, this was just between the couple now. Tammy turned after her lawyer finished. Finished dying. Okay, that's what I want to say. Tammy turned after her lawyer finished dying in time to eat the hard edge of a picture frame. It showed a stormy ocean with sunlight breaking on a tossing ship between the waves like a moment of hope. Her head bounced off the wall, but Yeah. Okay. Let me fix that. I'm sorry. I had a comma where it didn't belong. Her head bounced off the wall, but running into the recorder kept her from falling. She sliced his groin and the inside of his leg. Before she could pull the glass weapon away from the recorder's wounds, Blake came down flat with the frame, shattering its glass over her head, lacerating her scalp. The recorder went down screaming with the handle still lodged in his bleeding leg. The remains of the picture fell away. Tammy was painted up, let's say good and red. Tammy was painted up good and red from her hair down. But Blake, which I misspelled, decided it would have been more effective if he stuck with the hard edge. She charged nails out at him. He focused on deflecting her claws, so she was able to sink her teeth into his bicep and tear back and forth, let's say like a wild animal. He ended up on his back on the table with pages of financial disclosures pasted. Uh, he ended up on his back on the table with. Okay, no, let's say this. He ended up on the table with pages of financial disclosures pasted to the back of his suit coat. Okay, that works fine. She was on top of him, all teeth, claws, and fists. He didn't get much offense off and hid in his defense. All right. And his defense was full of holes as she tore into him. You never loved me, never, you never did. You're effing crazy. That seemed to make her even more furious, as if it were possible to escalate this day any further. As he slid backward and fought for his life, he had a stray thought for Judge Rippin. That man, even though he was retired from the bench, would be in real trouble whenever those doors finally opened. He found himself wishing the court recorder guy had gone on taking notes of all this. His weight slid off the back edge of the table and brought her tumbling with him. She gave a cry of pain he couldn't enjoy because he ate another knee, this time to the gut, that hurt him deep and left him on his back again. She leered into his cloudy vision. She had some sort of golden writing pen up in her fist like a dagger as she said, "You hurt me deeply, Blake. Everything you ever did to me stole another piece of my soul. You bled me out day after day until there was nothing left to take anymore." She raised the pen higher over her head. Okay, let me put that in, over her head, so that it caught the slant of sunlight through the windows. Damn, it was getting late. This had gone on all day. Blake grabbed whatever he could put his hands on and struck out with it as she came down with the pen. The pen ground against bone as it entered his chest and twisted to the side. Tammy sucked in breath, and her hands spasmed beside her face on both sides. The stiletto heel had stuck at least 2 inches into her eye socket before Blake's hand fell away. That needs to be possessive. He had nothing left in him to fight with, but was thankful. Okay, that doesn't need to be a comma. But was thankful when she fell backward away from him instead of onto him. He felt himself sinking into the darkness of unconsciousness or death. It was hard to tell which at this point. Of course, they finally got the doors unlocked and opened shortly after all this. The group included security guards, but no sign of Judge Rippin. He'd have to give his explanation later. Let me throw one more thing in here. Blake thought, "I'm paying for this BS by the hour." So Blake thought, "I'm paying for this BS by the hour." Of course, they finally got the doors open. He would have to give his explanation later. The court recorder breathed out one more slow exhale, and that was it for him. Tammy apparently had a knack for finding arteries. That fit what Blake knew of her before this day left the rails. All right. "Stenographer," Blake coughed out from the floor. Dark blood spattered his lower lip. That was what that guy's job was called. He knew he remembered it. Okay, so that is the end of Who Gets What. Probably the worst divorce arbitration of all time.